We've all heard of Middle-earth, and we've all heard of Valinor, the undying land in the Uttermost West, but what's the deal with the other continents on Tolkien's planet? What mysteries lie beyond the easternmost edge of Middle-earth? What's lurking in the uttermost south? Maya, Govan and Melanine, and welcome to another episode of Tolkien Untangled. In today's episode, I am talking about Middle-earth mysteries. So, if you're looking for hard and fast facts, some of my other videos might provide more of those than this one. But if you're wanting to speculate on the murkiest depths of the Tolkienian iceberg, then let's get going. As I'm sure you will know, Middle-earth, technically called Endor, is a large continent on the planet which Tolkien called Arda. And back in the First Age, this continent was quite a bit larger than it is at the time of The Lord of the Rings, as it included a great swathe of land called Beleriand, which after the First Age ceased to exist. Anyway, in the uttermost west of Arda, which in the beginning was a flat planet, there is Aman, the continent where we'll find the blessed realm of Valinor, aka the Undying Lands. And between these two continents, but only during the Second Age, there was also the great island of Undor, also known as Elenar, but most frequently known as Numenor. It's kind of weird, isn't it, that both Endor and Undor have gone on to be words associated with Star Wars, considering Tolkien developed them for his stories decades before the first Star Wars film was even made. Anyway, as far as Tolkien's stories go, Endor, aka Middle-earth, Aman, aka the Undying Lands, and Undor, aka Numenor, are the only three landmasses with any real relevance to the plot. But they are not the only landmasses upon Arda. What about the Darklands, or the New Lands, or the Land of the Sun? Well, I'm going to begin with the Uttermost East. As I say, back in the day, Arda was a flat planet, and it was also relatively symmetrical. In the far west, there was Aman, where the Valar would build their blessed realm after the destruction of their divine lamps, and in the middle, there was Middle-earth. Far to the east, however, there was a third continent, the highly mysterious Lands of the Sun. Now, I really can't tell you all that much about the geography of this eastern continent, except that it was separated from Middle-earth by the East Sea. It was roughly the same size as Aman, and in its centre there was a great curved mountain range known as the Walls of the Sun. Which is curious because, as you'll be aware if you know the Silmarillion, Arda existed for quite some time before either the sun or the moon even came into existence. So, in the beginning, the East Continent almost certainly would not have been called the Land of the Sun. Instead, it might simply have been known as Easterness, or simply the Eastern Lands. Tolkien did also once use the Quenya word Oronto to describe the uttermost east, but that was only in his very, very earliest writings, and what he was talking about there wasn't like a separate continent, it was just an eastern part of Middle-earth, so probably not too relevant to this video. Anyway, I guess the most salient question you might be asking right now is, known as the Eastern Lands by whom? Like, who dwelt in the Lands of the Sun? Well, as is going to be a running theme throughout this video, the answer is we don't know. It's a mystery. However, I would argue there's actually quite a bit of evidence to suggest these lands are entirely empty, like utterly unpopulated. And there are three main reasons why I say this. Firstly, all elves, men, and dwarves awoke in Middle-earth, and the races of elves and men are famous for migrating westward from their place of awakening. In order to get to the Lands of the Sun, they'd have to journey east instead, and somehow they'd have to cross an ocean all on their own, which seems astronomically unlikely. It's never mentioned by Tolkien, and it also seems to kind of contradict a massive part of the point of why the rest of the elves and men either stayed where they were or journeyed westward in the first place. Secondly, the Lands of the Sun exist as a kind of counterpoint, an opposite to the Undying Lands in the West. And whereas the Uttermost West is an ideal place of harmony and beauty and near perfection, The lands of the sun are described as burnt lands. After the first ever rising of the sun, just under 600 years before the end of the First Age, this continent presumably took that name. But the implication seems to be that after the sun rose, the eastern land was scorching hot, blistered by its heat, and was therefore totally inhospitable. And thirdly, the lands of the sun are not destined to last. 122 years before the end of the Second Age, the island of Numenor sank beneath the waves, like Atlantis style. And the entity who did the sinking was Eru Ilúvatar himself, the creator of all things. During the drowning of Numenor, Ilúvatar also changed the shape of Arda. He made this flat world round, and in so doing, so-called empty lands to the east of Middle-earth were also cast back and destroyed. It seems safe to presume these empty lands are the lands of the sun, and if they were populated by, sentient incarnate beings, I really don't think Ilúvatar would have callously cast them back and destroyed them. He's supposed to be a good god. The people of Numenor might disagree, but at least their landmass was destroyed as a direct consequence of their actions. It seems totally unfair to destroy the Uttermost East because of the actions of the people of Westerness. Also, if the Eastern lands were populated, I don't think they'd be referred to as capital E, empty. But just because I'd argue there's no one living in these burnt eastern lands of the sun does not mean no one's ever looked upon them. In fact, we know for certain that some people have. Before the downfall of Numenor, Númenórean sailors explored all the great oceans of Arda, and because they were forbidden from sailing west towards the Undying Lands of Aman, many Númenóreans ventured east, and some eventually sailed within sight of the Uttermost East, the edge of the world, the land of the sun. We don't know if any of them set foot on that continent, but Tolkien does tell us some of them glimpsed from their high prows the gates of morning. I can't tell you what the gates of morning are exactly, but I would guess they are potentially an opening in the walls of the world through which one might behold Arien, the Maya spirit of fire, as she transports the last fruit of Lauraline, the fire-golden sun, back into Arda for the dawning of each new day. However, the lands of the sun are not the only extra continent that I want to talk about. To the southeast of Middle-earth lie the mysterious Darklands, the southern continent. And part of what makes this southern landmass so interesting is how it was formed. As I've already mentioned, in the beginning there were only 3 continents, the Uttermost West, the Uttermost East, and Middle-earth in between them. Arda was symmetrical. Until, arguably, Middle-earth's most cataclysmic battle was fought. In the Silmarillion, it's known as the Battle of the Powers. In the Grey Annals, it's called the War of the Gods. Whatever we name it, it was the decisive conflict that brought about victory in the war for the sake of the elves. The Valar of the Uttermost West, effectively the gods of Arda, did battle with the hosts of Melkor, and in the earth-shattering destruction that ensued from their clash, the inland sea of Ringil, which sat in the middle of Middle-earth's southern half, grew great, and its raging waters overflowed the land, cutting the continent into 2. Middle-earth became quite a bit smaller, and the Darklands were born. Now, when it comes to talking about what went on in this far south, it can sometimes be tricky to distinguish whether Tolkien was talking about the unexplored far south of Middle-earth, i.e. Far Harad, or whether he was talking about this separate continent. For example, in the Silmarillion, we are told that the mother of Shelob, Ungoliant, departed into the forgotten south of the world, where her offspring abode and wove their hideous webs. Perhaps Tolkien meant she fled into southern Middle-earth, but the phrase forgotten south of the world does at least imply, maybe, Ungoliant made it all the way to the Darklands. I don't know how she crossed an ocean, but perhaps she is part of what made them so dark. Perhaps Shelob has a whole host of giant spider-like siblings crawling around this giant forsaken continent in the far south. Wait a minute, is the Darkland Australia? Unfortunately, the only thing we can really say for certain is that in the Second Age, Númenórean sailors would have also been aware of these shores. We have no idea if they made land there, or explored the coast, or settled anywhere, or built any colonies, but all of that is possible. Alternatively, it's equally possible that they recognize this land as a dark and evil place, they thought there are far too many giant spiders here, and decided to keep their distance. But they did at least know it existed. Now, before I finish this short video, there's one more continent that I've got to mention. The great landmass known only to the people of Middle-earth as the New Lands. And the story of these new lands is quite bittersweet. As their name suggests, the New Lands are the least old of Arda's continents. They only came into existence during Ilúvatar's changing of the world during the downfall of Númenor, towards the end of the Second Age. In other words, these lands were born of the same event that cast back and destroyed the Land of the Sun, and potentially the Lands of Shadow. And they were discovered by the men of Middle-earth by accident. Centuries, or maybe millennia, after the downfall of Númenor, some Dúnedain sailors from the old land of Endor set off west across the Great Sea Belagaia, in the hope they might find the ruins of their drowned ancestral homeland. Or at least they might find the peak of Númenor's tallest mountain hopefully still sticking up out of the water. If they did, they thought perhaps they might once again stand atop it and catch a glimpse of Valinor in the uttermost west, as their ancestors did before the downfall. But no such peak was ever found. What the mariners did find in the west, however, was a whole new continent. Not an undying one, like Valinor, but new lands subject to death just like the old ones. And the fact that we know that suggests that there must have been some kind of mortal creatures living there. Anyway, after discovering new lands, these Middle-earth mariners kept going, further and further west, still yearning for that glimpse of the uttermost west. They followed the sunset, they crossed oceans, they found new shores, until eventually they discovered that the coastline lying directly before them was in fact the eastern coast of Middle-earth. They'd gone west and west and west and west, and now, weary from travel, they found themselves back in the east. The magnitude of the extent to which the world had changed truly dawned on them. Arda's been bent. It has become round. The uttermost west has been removed from it, and now there is no mortal in existence who can build a ship that could sail the straight road to it. They are doomed to forever sail in circles, circumnavigating their round planet, but never ever coming in sight of Valinor. In the Adunaic language of their Númenórean ancestors, they realized Idokatha Betaina Loci. All roads are now bent. We have no idea if these Third Age Dúnedain sailors explored or settled any part of the new lands in the west, but if they did, I highly doubt it was to any significant extent. Gondor's power waned over the span of the Third Age, and these new lands west of Númenor would be an incredibly long way from Middle-earth. It would be, I think, quite impossible to maintain any kind of long-term communication. We know the new lands west of Middle-earth exist, but much like, I guess, the Americas were to people of pre-15th century Europe, nothing is really known about them. Maybe there were people there. Certainly I think there were plants and animals dwelling there, but the truth of it is, whatever they were and however they lived, no story of Middle-earth ever tells of them. Anyway, that's all for this Mysteries of Middle-earth mini-episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, be sure to hit like and leave a comment and click subscribe if you haven't already to make sure you don't miss any future videos coming soon. However, until next time, as always, my dear friends, much love, stay groovy, and Nevair Melanin.